As a kid, when I wasn't pretending to pay attention or forgetting to pay attention, I often burnt through any sketch comedy I could find on my cracked iPad mini. Sketch comedy was my favorite thing in the world, so only finding out about comedian Trevor Moore after I graduated college kind of felt like finding an extra room in my childhood home. A secret, fun room that talks a lot about Bush. He and his sketch comedy group, Whitest Kids U Know, were all over YouTube back when their show was airing. If you know who Trevor is, you know exactly who I'm talking about. And if you don't know who Trevor is, but you just happened upon him in passing, chances are he left an impression. The sketch that finally got to me was It's Illegal to Say, which is a pretty good introduction to his vibe. It's like a fun fact you'd hear in a schoolyard, mixed with a quirky delivery and a deadpan evil. A lot of his jokes can feel a lot like jokes that people might make with their friends, mostly because that's what a lot of them started as, jokes he would make with the other Whitest kids. Although to be fair, he and his friends are all great improv comedians, so it's not like it's just jokes you'd make with your friends. In fact, when me and my friends try to make each other laugh, we don't usually go for jokes, we just trade Psych quotes. Rather, Moore's approach to comedy has a distinct style. It makes the serious absurd and takes the absurd very seriously. I wanted to try and figure out if I could find some more details about how he wrote and constructed his comedy, because a lot of times it felt like going to a different world, a space where Trevor's logic ruled and everybody else's logic was deemed absurd. And as we all know, the best thing that you can do to a joke is explain it. That makes it even funnier. So, I'm going to work my way through Moore's comedy chronologically and try and point out where I see jokes that emphasize his style and how it's evolving. Fair warning to the elderly and to children, who I call the reverse elderly, Trevor Moore makes a lot of jokes about religion, history, politics, just in general, a bunch of stuff that might make people really, really mad. So if you don't want to be associating your pearls with your sweaty, sweaty palms, I would probably not watch this one, but otherwise, let's get started. Trevor Moore lived and breathed comedy. I went through the DVD commentaries for the show and then went through the Twitch streams they made reflecting on the show years later, and in both I found that Trevor was constantly telling jokes, only telling stories if he thought they were particularly funny stories, or talking about challenges if they were particularly funny challenges. It was great, although I did get distracted by a lot of the jokes and ultimately ended up crawling back to Wikipedia for more straightforward answers. But it came as no surprise to me that Trevor Moore has spent most of his life writing jokes. He was publishing comics at 12, and then had a public access show when he was 17 years old, getting a show on what would become Ion TV at 18 years old. This show, The Trevor Moore Show Mark I, is where sketches like A Better Place and If You Think Of first aired. It got canceled over accidentally being scheduled at 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings instead of the previous night like Trevor thought, so kids who were waking up to watch their Saturday morning cartoons would get to watch Hey Hey Who Died Today instead. He attended Manhattan School of Visual Arts, where he met Sam Brown, Zach Cregger, Darren Trumeter, and Timmy Williams, and the five of them ultimately started performing under a name given to them while they were freestyle rapping on the subway: the Whitest Kids U Know. It's with them that Trevor's dark humor starts to get absurd, and it's also where a lot of the sketches from the show originate. When a joke worked for the group, they weren't afraid to keep using it, and it also spoke to the timelessness of a lot of the jokes they were doing on stage. They'd perform sketches first on stage like Whip Boy, Astronaut Mess, Sam in a Bag, and leg peeing, which they had a leg peeing machine that was made for them by one of their roommates. A lot of these sketches really embraced an absurd concept that they would come up with and then push that concept out as far as it go, trying to explain the sort of world it lives in and the jokes that can be told in that world. By the time he graduated, he had also spent time in the NBC Page program, where he met his future wife, unintentionally subverting the program by finding romantic success instead of professional success. The Whitest Kids toured on stage for 2 years before they finally got their own show. The show introduced them to a wider audience and relentlessly pushed them towards writing more sketches. Of course, they had a literal wall of ideas to pull from, and I'm not using that word incorrectly. How dare you? When I say literally, I mean literally. They wrote all their ideas on the wall because of a miscommunication Trevor had with an executive. But the group was very considerate of how their stage sketches were going to play on camera, often waiting to adapt a stage sketch until they had a good idea for how they could do it. For the first season, they got away with filling in some of the spaces with sketches from the Trevor Moore show or stuff they put together for other networks, but by the time the second season rolled around, they had to fill in a lot of the space themselves, just jotting down sketches as fast as they could. So a lot of the sketches from this era where they had the TV show were thought of by the group members individually or during writing sessions they would have when they came together. This is why a lot of the sketches feel like jokes that you would tell to your friends, because it is oftentimes them just trying to make each other laugh. They would literally write down jokes and then pitch them to each other, and then vote on which ones were the funniest. Songs of olden times started as an inside joke between Sam and Trevor. Dr. Feeler was improvised by Zach and Trevor when they had extra time in the doctor's lounge office. What do doctors work in? And Horses Love Stegosauruses behind the scenes taught me that the key to a Darren and Trevor sketch was bestiality. After you start watching the sketches, one after the other for a while, you start realizing that part of the charm isn't just the individual jokes, but how they're being told among a group of friends. Timmy especially helps sell this because he's the scapegoat for a lot of the jokes, and the way he plays it sells it every time, and lets you know that he is actually really comfortable with his friends. Another key factor in a lot of Whitest Kids sketches were how hard they worked and how it mixed with how hard they partied. A lot of sketches were filmed rushed and hungover because they had come up with them the previous night out drinking. Timmy Poops' His Pants was filmed hungover on a set they had to break into. Gallon of PCP had to be filmed quickly because of the park, leaving Zach haunted by a backboard that appears in the background of the sketch. He mentions it in both the DVD commentary and the behind the scenes years later. It's worth note that Zach is now a pretty successful director, and he actually is gonna be working on a new Resident Evil movie, which was announced back in January. Point is, all 5 of them took the show very seriously. They were good at coming up with jokes and then expanding on those jokes until it was a giant sketch filled with a multitude of jokes, all of which spawned from the original joke. When they were talking about teachers' union, they talked like they had their own language and logic that they used when coming up with sketches, as if they would have questions about life and then just answer it themselves. The group distinguished itself with its approach to dark humor, and Trevor's persona as a comedian started to grow throughout his tenure on the show. He approaches a serious situation with childlike logic, yet approaches children like they've been working a desk job for 40 years. He loves making jokes about presidential assassinations, attempted presidential assassinations, and conspiracy theories surrounding the United States government. And he has songs about smoking weed with dinosaurs, or how to not make crystal meth. He's the first person to take control of a wacky situation, and the last person you want delivering your baby. Throughout the show, he develops his comedic persona exclusively through sketches, which is really impressive to me, considering a lot of sketch comedy shows at the time had audience segments or places where the comedians could talk more and be a little bit more like a comedian, a la the Chappelle Show. It's impressive to craft a persona like that exclusively through the sketches without addressing any audience. Once their show wrapped up, Trevor Moore spent some time pulling fast ones on the unsuspecting pedestrians on a Jay Leno segment called Winnovations. An article on Uprocks by David Dennis Jr. describes the show as more convincing people that he's come up with a new invention, which is usually a worthless contraption made to make the user look dumb. It's a segment that Dennis describes as consistently the best thing Jay has on any given night. Moore said on an AMA that he tried out Jay Leno because it was a different style than he was used to and thought it would be an interesting challenge. The results emphasized Moore's understanding of how pranks worked, putting the brunt of the joke on the device that he created rather than the pedestrian that he was interacting with. It was a way for him to not play into the sort of almost harassment to harassment that a lot of pranks at the time were doing, while still maintaining his own edgy comedic style. But that was just for Jay Leno. On his own, he started trying to focus on making his jokes rhyme better, and finding people to make them sound prettier. He wasn't a stranger to comedy music by any means. Hitler rap was actually something he did for his student film, so one assumes it helped him get his degree, and he had been doing songs on the show which were, for the most part, written by him and about his more personal life. My favorite of these is still When God Says Wash Your Hands, because I've been a compulsive hand washer my entire life, and I never knew it was God the whole time. Trevor's first album after the show, Drunk Text to Myself, is probably the closest to the Whitest Kids style, which is because most of them were written during that time. He describes them as leftovers from the show, and they share that sort of conspiratorial subject matter, but mixed with the absurd, sort of ridiculous delivery. Help Me calls Diddy a predatory creep towards Justin Bieber. Tom Hanks is an Asshole is a song that Trevor made because he didn't think people were mean enough to Tom Hanks. And Time for Guillotines is calling for the heads of the ruling class. The music fits his established style well, and it gives us a good idea of what he's like as an individual comedian. It's still very dark and conspiratorial, maybe a little less shocking than what ends up being on Whitest Kids, but all in all, it's great and hilarious. His next album, High in Church, focuses its subject matter a little bit more. Songs like High in Church and The Gays Got Married focus more on Trevor's religious upbringing in his hometown, while songs like Bullies or The Ballad of Billy John focus more on internet culture and how it sort of warps the world we live in. There's still plenty of Whitest Kids style stuff in here, with specific note going to Kitty History, which is a song that replaces us with cats and then goes very, very deep into conspiracies surrounding the Bush family. And it feels like a spiritual successor to a Whitest Kids sketch they kept pitching called Cat Congress, where they dress a bunch of cats up in suits and commentate on it as if it's Congress. Also, Sam and Daryl feature on a song that feels like a song they would have written together, called Bought a Monkey, which starts out as a very simple joke about a monkey being a metaphor for a gun before it quickly devolves into its own escalating situation. But the final album that he puts out, The Story of Our Times, is probably the musical comedy in its best form, in my opinion. The jokes all tie together thematically this time around. They focus more on modern day culture and how it's been influenced by the internet, celebrities, politics, and all that sort of thing. It's very fun, but the floor-dropping closer, Gary, is what got to me. Gary isn't even a joke. It's just a song about a friend of Trevor's who gets out of jail and claims to be getting better, but Trevor keeps his distance because he knows he's not. It was honestly stunning. I haven't had that much dust collect in my eye in a long time, although I'll admit that might have as much to do with the shock of it as anything else. I have a few more things in his career to talk about, but the music was the last thing that I came to in my research, and Gary was the last song I listened to, and it is the most sincere and poetic that I've heard Trevor be, and it honestly was so great that I'm surprised he didn't do it more. But as I said earlier, Trevor Moore lived and breathed comedy. So in 2019, he and Sam started up the Trevor Moore Show Mark II, where they tried to solve the world's problems with co-host Blair Saki, as well as a live comedian guest and a specialist for that week's topic. It's a spin on the Late Show format that fits Trevor. The topics they talk about are always entertaining, and Trevor manages to hang on to his dark sense of humor, this time being punctuated by producers constantly screaming in his ear at him. It's also a really good showcase for Sam, who ends up taking a lot of punches in the name of comedy for this one. He's often put in situations mostly for Trevor's amusement, and he takes being the scapegoat really well and plays all of it hilariously. It's with this show that they did the 24-hour Trevathon, 24 hours live on air with rotating guests and stuff like that, which is honestly really impressive to me. I know Trevor is not the first person to do something like this, but it is the first thing like this that I have consumed, and it was impressive how much of it was entertaining for me and how long he managed to keep going. Finally, he was one of the many entertainers that took to the internet during the pandemic. It's on Twitch where he and a lot of the other Whitest Kids reunited virtually and started reflecting on their show, as well as doing new content, such as cooking shows, shows about stocks, shows about news, just whatever the members thought was funny. Each of them got their own little space to shine, and it was a great massive amount of content from them. My favorite being Timmy's D&D campaign that he runs for the rest of them, where Trevor initially tries to just make them all go start a comedy group together in a fantastical fantasy world. The Twitch era is great. It's another great vehicle for the members to get across their style of comedy, and none of them have lost an ounce of their chemistry with each other. Trevor himself is especially fun to watch because even though, like I said, he mostly jokes throughout everything, this still feels like the most personal his content gets and the best you get to see of him as a person. Which makes it even more impressive how effortlessly he manages to stay funny. Unfortunately, not long after that, Trevor passed away. He fell from his balcony at 41 years old. It was a tragic accident and a shocking loss for everyone. Something like that is not easy to process, and a lot of people online who were fans of him, but who didn't know him personally, started having trouble believing it, and speculating more on what could have happened. It's these little pockets in comment sections or threads on Reddit that first got me back down the road of Trevor Moore, because it's these little pockets that speculated it was a vast conspiracy that he had died. In much the same way that Trevor used to obsess over conspiracy theories, people obsessed over Trevor's death being a conspiracy theory. I can't remember which social media platform I was on or in what form I was consuming It's Illegal to Say when I found the comment that said, "It's jokes like this that got him targeted by the FBI." And I didn't know much about him, but I saw a lot of comments being like, "It's obvious if you just look for it. Oh yeah, 100%. And so I, being a bit ignorant, just was like, what? When did this happen? And why has nobody said anything? They're talking about the extensive jokes that Trevor made regarding the United States. Crack depicting the CIA starting the crack epidemic, his string of sketches about being a presidential assassin, the Pope rap being about the Pope's ultimate interest in getting richer and funding evil while preaching good, Time for Guillotines again being about gaining class consciousness and overthrowing the ruling class, and Kitty History being about the Bush family for the most part, and a bunch of tweets he was making about modern conspiracies also didn't help, people said. When I got through all these things, I realized two things. One, most of the evidence happened way before he died. And, I mean, it would be a little bit weird if the FBI decided to kill him over tweets when most of the worst stuff he said was put on television. Two, Trevor was really funny and really good at pulling from the dark parts of life to find something funny. He wasn't really a shock value comedian. Most of the time, he didn't say things with the intent of shocking you. He just liked discussing things that he didn't think should be discussed in as horrible a way as possible. He wasn't out to make fun of people. He just liked bending the logic of something dark until it came back around and became something funny. After I went down the rabbit hole of the conspiracy theory, I went on to watch all of Whitest Kids. And then I watched it all again with my girlfriend. And then I watched it all again with my mother, although I'll admit that last time I was mostly just trying to screw with my mother. Something was very entertaining to me about all the jokes that Trevor and his friends were telling. I don't know if I thought all of them hit, or if some of them even hit at all, but all of them were very entertaining for me, just because of the way they interacted with each other, and the way that the tone felt consistent. And once I got absorbed in that absurd tone that their comedy sort of lives in, I think I finally started to understand what it is that makes them so funny. It's a lot of dick and fart jokes. But I guess if that's not good enough for you, then it's also a really good snapshot of what it's like to have like a really insane conversation late at night with your friends in your 20s. People say things with their friends when they're young that they wouldn't ever utter in front of an authority figure or a stranger. Things that make them look back and wince later in life when they're thinking about all the things that people might throw back at them later. Evil conspiracies and speculating about history without researching the answer, even if it doesn't make any sense, or just talking absurd amounts of shit about anyone for any reason. It all just feels a lot like hanging out with a friend, and when these five do it, it's funny, and it kind of makes you feel like you're in on a joke that not everybody's in on. I think a lot of what Trevor got about comedy was that it happens in those light moments that you have with people you know. Sure, tons of comedians practice their punchlines, and others are really good at making any story funny, and Trevor is not bad at either of those things by any means, but what he really understood is that people also just laugh when somebody says something stupid in a situation you wouldn't expect. He understood the light moments of life, and he knew how to take those moments and make them something funny for everybody. that might be what he was best at. He might have been the best at it. Just taking a little moment in his life that he found funny and refining it until it was a joke that everybody could enjoy. So that's Trevor Moore. If you want to watch Whitest Kids, most of it is up on YouTube, and there's a live stream constantly running. Also, all of the Trevor Moore show from Comedy Central is up on YouTube, as well as the 24-hour Trevathon, as well as a lot of VODs from their Twitch streams. So just go check it all out. They're really easy to get into if you want to. In the meantime, I'm going to stop existing until the next video. Goodbye.